conducted a vast amount of activities. We have mainly used public participatory GIS systems. We have implemented them in our curriculum. In addition, we have taken the necessary steps on how to use these tools, how to conduct soil management activities, how to develop strategies for participatory planning activities. Within the framework of this project, this final session is dedicated to integrated landscape management and planning. And within this framework, this final day is dedicated to student work. There were students within the framework of our project who were actively involved, who came to Armenia from Germany. They conducted their activities here. They had their master's thesis during their visit here. At the same time, we had students who went to Germany. They did not do their thesis there, but they conducted a number of courses. They participated in courses. We will see the work of Miriam here and other students who participated. They already presented their work, and we can send citations for those who are interested on how you can access these papers. We're very glad that we have members from the Agrarian University and participants today. I don't know how many have been able to participate during the events of the first and second day. We had very comprehensive and broad discussions, in my opinion. Very interesting. We are so very glad that today we will be able to also hear ideas from the student sites. What we can do regarding the landscape, integrated landscape management, how we can have our future steps in general, how can these ecosystem services and public participation, how can we have them deeply embedded in our landscape planning activities? By having said this all,
Claudia, if you want to say a couple of things and take it over from here. Yeah.
Claudia Blink has been my colleague from Hohenheim University, who is among the best 3-4 universities in Europe focusing on agricultural topics. They are more than interested in to further deepen their cooperation with Armenia. Claudia, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so thanks very much, Alan, for introducing me and opening up here this session in today's afternoon. You said a lot on the GATES project already, so I will just not repeat that, but would now like to hand over basically the floor to the students who will be at the center of today's session. It's very important for us to involve young people with new and fresh ideas in the GATES project. So that was all actually what the GATES project was about, to create networking, to create exchange among people who are interested in sustainable development in rural areas, but also in urban areas, using the concept of ecosystem services, but also going beyond it if it should be necessary. So we are very eager to learn more about the work which has been carried out, to exchange on the experiences. And with this, we will have now 5 different presentations by students who have been involved in the GATES project or who now said that they would be interested in presenting their experiences, their work on the ecosystem services concept in the Armenian context. So we will start with a presentation by Miriam Rüger, who was one of the GATES project master's thesis students. She spent 2 months in Armenia back in 2019. and very successfully completed her master's thesis then based on this fieldwork. We will continue then with another presentation by one of the GATES students, that's Alyssa Boogie, who unfortunately can't be with us today. She is now far north in Canada, working with Indigenous communities in the Canadian North, and she could not participate due to work-related reasons. But we are having a presentation, a recording of a presentation, which she held some time ago, and we will play that here and use this as a basis for discussion. We will continue then with Sare Galstian, who will provide insights on work being carried out at the Armenian National Agrarian University. Very happy to have you here aboard and learning about your experiences. Sare will be followed by Ashot Gabrielian, again from the Armenian National Agrarian University, again providing insights in an ongoing project in the field of ecosystem services. And finally, the stage will be to Monica, and here I'm not sure if I pronounced the family name correctly, Khashatrian, perhaps. And she will, yeah, was that more or less correct?
No, it's correct. Okay.
Thank you.
It's a Khashatrian, like the composer.
Okay, okay. Ah, okay, good. Thanks. Yes, again, then expanding on a very nice overview on ecosystem services related research, which has been carried out in Armenia. So exciting presentations ahead of us. I would now like to hand over to Miriam to start presenting. But let me say one more thing before we go into that. So we will discuss, we will have questions afterwards, after each presentation. And here we will have the support also of two people who are also around here and who are also part of the GATES project. So please, Niklas Effenberger is with us. So he is a team member with my university chair at University of Hohenheim and working with me for quite a long time now, also having visited Armenia in 2019 for some time. And he will also be contributing to the discussion, to the questions, to the sharing of experiences. And as well, Maria Garcia Martin is with us today, another member of the GATES project team, also involved in many different ways with training, workshops in the project, also contributing to the supervision of master's thesis. And she also is here to support us and our discussion.
Sorry, can I just jump in? I'm really sorry, Miriam, to do this, but I forgot to mention a couple of very important things about GATES project. One of them being, if I could share my screen, and this is of interest to the academic community. We have a website on GATES, on the Acopian Center website, and we have developed 4 modules, and this will grow and expand into more modules in the coming months, on participatory methods and environmental and ecosystem protection work. And so the modules are about participatory methods in general and some deeper exploration of some of the methods, and then how participatory methods can be used in wild harvest, planning and management, and also how participatory methods can be applied to urban biodiversity, planning and governance. We're also now developing 3 more modules on participatory methods. One has to do with forests, and the other has to do with water resources, and the third has to do with ecosystem services in general and the role of participatory methods. So these are educational tools that are available to the public. We will release them more kind of ceremoniously to make it available to whoever finds it useful to integrate into their curriculum, or make it useful and available to the students if they want to think about these various participatory approaches to environmental governance. We also have prepared a video, which will release soon, on wild harvest in Armenia. The video highlights 5 stories of heroes in Armenia, heroes in quotes, who are using wild harvest to either build an export business or just feed their households. That's the second story. A third story is about how they engage children and education wild harvest. A fourth story is how it's used as an education tool for rural communities. And the fifth story is someone who's innovating with wild harvest practices. So this video will also be available, and it's also a very good discussion piece for issues around wild harvest and sustainability of wild harvest. So I needed to mention that, sorry, because I think this is the relevant audience for that. Sorry about that.
Yeah,
Miriam,
actually it's providing a nice bridge to Miriam's work, because Miriam's work was actually the foundation for the wild harvest video, for really looking deeper into this topic and thinking about the central role it can actually play with regard to ecosystem services, livelihoods in Armenia. So Miriam, now please let us know more about your work.
Okay, well, let me share my screen. Yeah, and hopefully you can see that. Yes, so you already took away with your introduction a lot of my introductory slides, so I don't have to do that anymore. So first of all, thanks for the invitation to this GATE student conference. My name is Miriam Rüger. I'm a former GATE student, master thesis student for the GATE project, and I conducted research on wild plant harvest and ecosystem services. So wild harvest in general is the act of removing plants from their natural environment to use them for different purposes. And under the ecosystem services framework, you frequently find in literature that wild harvest mostly is a provisioning ecosystem service, and less frequently, but you also find that wild harvest is a cultural ecosystem service as well, because a lot of people, they connect certain traditions with wild harvest and different social aspects. So in Armenia specifically, since it's a biodiversity hotspot, meaning that there is a very rich flora in Armenia, wild harvest has been a tradition for almost 2000 years and is especially important in rural areas. So this is what was commonly known about wild harvest and Armenia. However, there are only a few studies available on wild harvest in Armenia, and this is where the idea for this topic under the GATE framework came from. So the aim of the study was really to get a broad understanding of wild harvest in Armenia and to combine it with the participatory approach of the GATE project. It was based on stakeholder involvement and to find potential for research in that area. So the thesis was more extensive than these two questions, but I cannot highlight all here. So I just want to give some results about these two questions. So which plant species are harvested and how does that fit in the ecosystem services framework? And secondly, how do people harvest and is this sustainable or is it detrimental to plant abundance? So in 2019, when I was in Armenia, we conducted field work in 4 communities. These were in Geratso in the Aragatsot march and the Prabak in Palavan in the Gerakunik march, as you can see in the map on the right-hand side. As a timeline for the research, there was a preparatory phase from February to August 2019. Then the field work in Armenia in September and October 2019, which I conducted in cooperation, of course, with Claudia Billing's Institute of the University of Hohenheim, most of all the Acopian Center, but also in collaboration with the GIZ in Yerevan. After that, from November 2019 to June 2020, I was busy with data analysis and writing the thesis on the topic. In terms of methodology, for the participatory approach on this topic, it made sense to conduct interviews with local wild harvesters, which we did. These interviews were structured. They were facilitated by a local student of the American University. They were conducted one-on-one in the communities in the respondents' home. The interviews were based on a questionnaire that had 10 sections, so it was very extensive, and interviews lasted in between 30 and 90 minutes. The big deviance is due to the fact that women had different extents of knowledge about wild plants. So I'm saying women. There were 23 interviews, and it were all women that were interviewed, which was a coincidence based on the fact that wild harvest is more frequently done by women. And but there was no intention to discriminate against men. That's just as a disclaimer. So already talking about results for the first question, what plants do people harvest and how does it fit in the ecosystem service framework? In the graph on the left-hand side, you see different use categories for plants. So there's medicinal purpose, tea, preservation, cooking, ornamental use, spice, and other. And for all of the plants that the women listed, they were asked to say what different purposes they use the plants from. So without going into more detail about this, I want to highlight some key points that came up in the research. So when looking at the data, I noticed that all the respondents harvest at least one plant for each medicinal purpose, tea, and cooking. And also 90% of the plants are used for 2, 3, or 4 different purposes. So most of the plants had multiple purposes, and each woman knew plants for different purpose categories as well. So there is an extensive knowledge about wild harvest and about the use of these plants. And we determined also with the questionnaire asking the women how they learned about wild harvest that this knowledge is a traditional knowledge that is passed down from generation to generation. Also, the women were asked whether or not they're accompanied for wild harvest, and most women, they go with community members or family members and friends. So there is a societal aspect to that as well. And then the traditional part and the societal aspect shows clearly that wild harvest in Armenia is a cultural ecosystem service. And also when you look at the graph on the left-hand side, it becomes very obvious that it is a provisioning ecosystem service as well. For the second question, how do the people harvest wild plants and is it sustainable or detrimental? You need to first know how do the people do that and how does it affect plant availability? So there were 2 sets of questions aiming to answer these points. The first is about harvesting techniques. So the women were asked, how do you harvest different plant parts? How do you harvest leaves, fruits, roots, herbs, flowers, and where do you harvest? And it was then determined based on the options of answers they were given, whether this is considered sustainable or not. For the change in plant availability aspect, it would have been nice to have data available on the development of the flora in the communities, like how many plants are there and has that changed. However, since the data was not available, the women were asked, did you perceive any changes over the past 5 years in the distance you need to travel to collect certain plants, in the presence of pests and diseases, in the general availability of plants, and are you aware of endangered species in your area? So considering these 2 aspects jointly allows to draw conclusions whether or not harvest is sustainable. However, the data that we got from this is very specific for individual plants and individual communities. So I'm not going to go into more detail about this. However, there are some key points that I want to highlight. And I want to talk more about like what are the drivers that determine whether or not wild harvest is sustainable. So it is very context specific. In a local context, this depends on how popular is a plant and how big is the plant population to begin with. It depends on the people that harvest, what is their collective activity, and how do they harvest the plants. And then it depends on the plant species as well. How regenerative is the plant? How well does it grow back once it is harvested? And how susceptible is it to damage in the first place? So this whole framework, as you can see, is relatively theoretical, and there are a lot of, let's say, variables that kind of feed into this to determine sustainability. But then how does this theoretical framework look in the so-called like real world? So I want to connect the aspect of traditional knowledge that I talked about and the sustainability concept. Because one of the questions that we also asked the woman was, how are you familiar with the concept sustainability? Meaning that you harvest plants in a way that they're still available to future generations. And actually, out of the 23 women, 20 women said that they do harvest wild plants in that way. And probably they have never heard about the term sustainability before, but they know the concept very well. So actually, most of the women know how to harvest sustainably. And showing this and comparing it with this very theoretical framework shows that there is a resource there that is mostly probably not used. So this one aspect that we discussed after I finished the thesis is the involvement of local stakeholders in citizen science approaches. How can this knowledge be used down the line to define more academic solutions? For example, how can women that go for wild harvest be involved in biodiversity monitoring when they go out in the field anyways? I don't want to go into more detail about the legislation and the regulatory aspects, just to throw it out there maybe for the following discussion. I tried to research about the regulatory framework about wild harvest, and also we spoke to the women about this. And often it is the case that regulations are either not present or not enforced, and people are generally not aware of this. So one of the things that I just want to say here is that legislation needs to fit the needs of the local harvesters, because they are the ones that are using this resource, that are relying on this resource, and that have the knowledge to use this resource adequately. Just two concluding remarks to summarize my presentation. First is that wild harvest is an important provisioning and cultural ecosystem service in the investigated communities. And the second remark is that participatory approaches by involving local stakeholders hold a lot of potential for scientific research and are important to define appropriate legislation. So that's it from me. And now it's time for questions and the discussion. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, Miriam, for a really fascinating talk. Very rich, the insights you got. So, are there questions to Miriam?
Miriam, can you tell us a little bit about, if you remember, or if you have, I know you did that analysis, how many species of plants were they collecting? They were in the hundreds, right, if I'm not?
There were in the hundreds of plants that they mentioned. If I have the number in my head correctly, I think it was 69.
Mm-hmm. So, and then, but some of them were much more used than the others, right?
Yes. There were some plants that were used by almost all of the women, like Aveluk or what was the other, Shushan.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
Are those plants indigenous to Armenia, or do they exist also in other parts of the world, or is it very site specific?
I mean, that depends on the plant species. For example, they collected a lot of thyme for tea, and thyme is generally a plant genera that has a lot of species in it. So I think that the thyme that they used is an Armenian specific plant, but there are also plants like stinging nettle that grow pretty much everywhere.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Maria.
Yes, thank you, Miriam. That was very, very interesting and very well presented. I was wondering, I guess it's quite a sensitive topic. Was it some reluctance at the beginning in the interview, or were they very open to talk about this?
I guess that was one of the things that we also considered is how our research is perceived in the communities. And there was one instance in one of the communities where we found out later that women were not being giving all of the information that we asked based on us coming there, and they didn't really know what we wanted. And yeah, it's one of the most sensitive issues was, and it was not specifically one of the key points of the questionnaire for that reason, is when you talk about legislation, women, they will be like, hey, okay, I'm not doing anything illegal, or they might be hesitant about that.
Miriam, can you expand a little bit on the economic dimension? So I guess for some of the women, this was also economically important activity. But I wonder if the potential is fully there to really make a living from wild harvest.
Yes, I can expand on that. It was part of the the thesis. I left it out of the presentation for now, for time reasons. So the women were asked specifically also, do you harvest the wild plants for sale? And they were asked to approximate the percentage of their total income. And for some women, this was very significant. There was a group that we interviewed in the Pravag that are a wild harvest cooperative. And for some of these women, that is their only way of income outside of their family income. So it is contributing to family income, but is also giving them some self-sufficiency.
Thank you. Are there more questions? Any reflections from the Armenian students, perhaps? No? Okay. So I suggest that we move on to the second presentation, and Goha, you have to take over here because this will now be a recorded presentation by Alyssa.
Yes, I will share my screen. You can hear me, correct?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great.
And I think the presentation will be in Armenian.
Yes.
The slides will be in English. So the non-Armenian speakers will have to go with the slides.
Okay, I will start now.
Yes. Okay, great. All right. So hello everyone. Thank you. Ներկայացնելու իմ թեզը, նորակալություն նաև Սիրանուշին, որը մեզ ներկայացրեց ծրագիրը և շատ ուրախ եմ ընդհանուր պատկերացումը ձևավորելու համար։ Կփորձեմ չկրկնել ասվածը և ավելի շատ իմ ուշադրությունը դարձնել իմ թեզին, հետազոտական հարցերին ու փորձեմ ներկայացնել մյուս բացահայտումները։ Ինչպես Ալոնը նշեց, մենք ունեինք տոննաներով տվյալներ և շատ ուրախ եմ ես, որ մասնակցել եմ այս ծրագրին, հուսով եմ, որ լավ արդյունքներ կունենա մեր ծրագիրը։ Թեզի վերնագիրն է էներգետիկ մշակույթը Հայաստանի գյուղական շրջաններում և կառուցման և սննդի պատրաստման բարելիքի օգտագործումը գենդերային տեսանկյունից։ Ինչու եմ ընտրել այս թեման։ Ես իմ մասնագիտությամբ լանդշաֆտների էկոլոգ եմ, բայց էներգետիկայի ոլորտը շատ է կապված կայուն զարգացման նպատակների հետ, ֆիզիկայի հետ և նաև էներգիան հնարավորություն է տալիս աշխատելու և ենթադրում է աշխատանք կատարելու ունակություն։ Ամեն տեսակ աշխատանք, որը մենք իրականացնում ենք մեր կյանքում, որոշակի էներգետիկա է պահանջում, էներգիա է պահանջում։ Էներգիայի անհասանելիությունը աշխարհում մեծ մարտահրավերներ է առաջացնում, խնդիրներ առաջացնելով առողջության, հնարավորությունների և մարդկանց եկամուտների առումով և կանանց վրա այս ամենը շատ ավելի մեծ ազդեցություն է ունենում։ Կանայք էներգետիկայի հետ կապված, էներգիայի հետ կապված շատ ավելի մեծ աշխատանք են իրականացնում։ Ապահովում են տանջարությունը, բառելափայտ են հավաքում և այլն։ Եվ ընտանիքներին վերականգնվող էներգիայով ապահովելու համար մենք պետք է փորձենք հասկանալ ինչպես առաջ մղել այս մեխանիզմները, ինչպես զարգացնել այս մեխանիզմները։ Հասկանալ նաև թե Հայաստանի գյուղական շրջաններում ինչ տեսակի էներգասպառման պրակտիկաներ են գործում։ Ներեցեք մի պահ կտրվեց, ինտերնետը Ալիսայի մոտ մի փոքր կտրտվում է, այսինքն հետազոտական հարցերն է ներկայացնում, որն է կանանց դերը կամ գենդերային դերը էներգետիկ առումով։ Որպեսզի ուսումնասիրենք մեր հարցերը, օգտագործեցի էներգետիկ մշակույթի շրջանակը։ Այս շրջանակը վերջերս է մշակվել 2010 թվականին եւ հետո արդեն ավելի կոնկրետացվել է 2015 թվականին առաջին անգամ հրապարակվել է Նոր Զելանդիայում, որից հետո այս շրջանակը կիրառության մեջ է դրվել աշխարհի տարբեր երկրներում։ Թվում է թե շրջանակը բարդ է, բայց դա այդպես չէ։ Ուղղակի շրջանակն օգնում է մեզ հասկանալ, թե ինչ է տեղի ունենում էներգետիկայի բնագավառում։ Մեջտեղում դրված են 3 տարբեր բաղադրիչներ։ Առաջինը դա մշակութային նյութական մշակույթն է, որը ենթադրում է ցանկացած ֆիզիկական բան, որը ուսումնասիրության բնագավառում մարդիկ օգտագործում են։ Այս պարագայում մենք ջերմության եւ ուտելիքի պատրաստման ենք անդրադառնալու։ Եվ նյութական մշակույթ ասվածը վերաբերում է, թե մարդիկ ինչպես են օգտագործում կառարանները, տունը, կան ենթակառուցվածքը, ջերմության տարբեր սարքերը, ինչպես է օրինակ կան էներգետիկ խնայողությունը ապահովված։ Այնուհետև գալիս է պրակտիկան կամ գործելակերպը, այսինքն այն, ինչ մարդիկ կանոնավոր կերպով իրականացնում են, դա կարող է իրականացվել առօրյա կերպով կամ ամսական կտրվածքով կամ որոշակի ժամանակային կտրվածքով։ Օրինակ, մարդիկ օրվա ընթացքում քանի անգամ են վառում իրենց վառարանը, կամ մարդիկ տարվա մեջ քանի անգամ են գնում եւ վառելակայք։ Դրանից հետո հաջորդ բաղադրիչը նորմերն են, որն ավելի աբստրակտ բնույթ է կրում։ Սա ենթադրում է արդյոք մարդիկ սիրում են, չեն սիրում, ընդունում են կամ լավ են համարում տվյալ այս կամ այն երևույթը, այսինքն այս հարցը վերաբերում է ավելի շատ նրանց ընկալումներին, այն հարցի վերաբերյալ, թե իրենք ինչ են ցանկանում անել կամ ինչ չեն ցանկանում անել։ Նաև օրինակ մարդ կա, կարող ընդունել, որ արևային էներգիան շատ ապահով է, անվտանգ է։ Դրանից հետո արդեն մենք անդրադառնում ենք բացատրակ արտաքին ազդակները։ Արտաքին ազդակները դրանք այն բոլոր գործոններն են, որոնք ազդում են այս 3 բաղադրիչների վրա եւ փոփոխում են այս բաղադրիչները։ Քանի որ մեր նպատակն է համայնքները, ենթադրենք, օրինակ մենք կարող ենք ուսումնասիրել թե հայաստանյան պետական քաղաքականությունը, որն է այս ոլորտում, եւ այս քաղաքականությունը կդիտարկվի որպես արտաքին գործող։ Սիրանուշը ներկայացրեց մեր ուսումնասիրության նախագծի տվյալները եւ մի քանի բան կցանկանայի ավելացնել, որոնք վերլուծական մասից են։ Մեր ընտրանքը եղել է սահմանափակ, իհարկե համայնքները նախնապես ընտրվել էին GIZ-ի եւ ISAC-ի կողմից եւ մենք ուսումնասիրել ենք այն տնային տնտեսությունները, որոնք օգտագործում էին ջերմության նպատակով տարբեր վառելիքներ, մենք չենք խոսել ուրիշ ընտանիքների հետ, այսինքն եւ մենք այդ արդյունքները չենք կարող շատ մեծ համեմատության ենթարկել, փորձել ենք ընտանիքների ներգրավել տարբեր սոցիալ-տնտեսական խավերից, տարբեր աշխատանքներ ունեցող փորձելով մեր ընտրանքը հնարավորինս բազմազան դարձնել, ինչպես Սիրանուշը ասաց, մենք նաեւ ապահովել ենք առնվազն 50% կանանց մասնակցություն ուսումնասիրությունում, ինչը շատ լավ է։ Իմ գործընկերները տվյալները հավաքել են անցյալ տարվա ավգոստոս եւ սեպտեմբեր ամիսների։ Տվյալների վերլուծության նպատակով հիմնականում օգտագործել ենք որակական մեթոդներ, այսինքն օրինակ հաճախականություն, կոնկրետ տվյալ պատասխանը, քանի անգամ է հնչեցվել այս կամ եւ քանի մարդու կողմից։ Օգտագործել ենք նաեւ որոշակի բանալի բառերի հիման վրա կոդավորում եւ քանի անգամ է նշվել այս բառը եւ այլն։ Նաեւ կատարել ենք մի փոքր քանակական վերլուծություն, հիմնականում ուսումնասիրելով կոռելյացիաները, որի նպատակով օգտագործվել են քանակական մեթոդները։ Այժմ անդրադառնամ իմ թեզի արդյունքների, Սիրանուշը ձեզ ներկայացրեց շատ կարևոր բացահայտումներ, որոնք արդեն իսկ արվել էին ծրագրի շրջանակներում։ Ես ընդհանուր կներկայացնեմ, թե այս բացահայտումները ինչ են ենթադրում։ Նախ եւ առաջ եկեք ուսումնասիրենք նյութական մշակույթը։ Մենք Հայաստանում շատ է օգտագործվում անտառափայտը եւ գոմախը, գազը օգտագործվում է ուտելիքը պատրաստելու համար, հետաքրքրական է սա։ Միգուցե դուք հայեք ձեզ համար կարող է կրկնվել, բայց կարևոր է հաշվի առնել, թե ինչ միջավայր կա եւ թե ինչ մարտահրավերներ կան այն համայնքներում, որոնք ավելի հեռու են գտնվում շուկաներից, Եվ միգուցե իրենց մոտ ենթակառուցվածքները, ճանապարհները դեռևս լավագույն վիճակում չեն նյութեր տեղափոխելու համար, ինչպես նաև մարդիկ գյուղական շրջաններում եկամուտի առումով ևս ավելի անապահով վիճակում են, այսինքն այս համայնքներում ապրող մարդկանցից շատերի համար շատ դժվար է ներդրում կատարել թանկարժեք նոր սարքավորումներում։ Եվս մեկ խնդիր, որը մենք արձանագրել ենք մեր ուսումնասիրության շրջանակներում, հետևյալն է. վարելափայտի սակավությունը շատ մեծ խնդիր է, մարդկանց իսկապես մտահոգում է, թե իրենց վարելիքը որտեղից են ձեռք բերելու։ Միգուցե իրենց այս խնդիրն արդեն իսկ անհանգստացնում է եւ իրենք իսկ արդեն իսկ խնդիր ունեն այդ վարելիքը ձեռք բերելու համար, բայց մարդիկ վախենում են, որ մի քանի տարուց արդեն վարելափայտ չի լինի եւ սա շատ մտահոգիչ է իրենց համար, այն առումով, թե իրենք այդ ինչ վարելիք են օգտագործելու։ Շատ հաճախ գյուղական շրջաններում տները կառուցվել էին 50-ական, 60-ական թվականներին եւ այդ շենքերի էներգարդյունավետությունը այդքան էլ բավարար չէ եւ ամենայն հավանականությամբ դա կարող է այն վարելիքի վրա, վարելատեսակի վրա, որը մարդիկ օգտագործում են։ Երբ ուսումնասիրում ենք մարդկանց պրակտիկաները կամ գործելակերպը, մենք տեսնում ենք, որ 25 եւ 26 տարբեր եղանակներով մարդիկ փորձում են նվազեցնել վարելիքի օգտագործման ծավալները։ Սա եւս մեծ մտահոգություն է։ Մարդիկ ինչպես են պահոստավորում վարելիքը կամ պահում վարելիքը, որոշակի ստանդարտ եղանակներով։ Օրինակ, շատ իրավիճակներում մենք տեսնում ենք, որ մարդիկ տնից դուրս գալուց վարարանը անջատել, սպասել մինչև քանքչի նոր դուրս գալ, սա հանդիսանում է բավականին մտահոգիչ, կամ ասենք տունն են փակում ամբողջ ձմռան ընթացքում, կամ մարդիկ անգամ նախապատվություն են տալիս տանը ցուրտ պայմաններում ապրելուն, ինչը կարող է շատ օր հետևանքներ ունենալ թե մարդու ֆիզիկական, ինչպես նաև հոգեկան առողջության վրա։ Մարդիկ գիտելիքը էներգիայի հետ կապված խոսում են իրենց հարևանների, ընկերների, բարեկամների հետ։ Այսինքն համայնքները խոսում են իրար հետ, փորձում են հասկանալ, թե իրենց համայնքները ինչպես կարող են էներգետիկայի հետ կապված պրակտիկաները փոփոխել։ Իհարկե, ամեն վայր ունի յուրահատկությունները եւ լուծումներն էլ պետք է ինչ-որ առումով յուրահատուկ լինեն։ Մենք տեսնում ենք, որ մարդիկ շատ ժամանակ են ծախսում նաև վարելիք գտնելու, հավաքելու, դա բերելու, պահոստավորելու վրա։ Այժմ անդրադառնանք նորմերին։ Ֆինանսական մատչելիությունը կամ էժանությունը շատ կարևոր հարց է մարդկանց համար։ Նաև շատ կարևոր է կոմֆորտը, հարմարավետությունը եւ արդյունավետությունը, ինչքանով է հեշտ վարելիքն օգտագործել։ Սա էլ է մարդկանց համար շատ կարևոր։ Որոշ դեպքերում մարդիկ նշել են, որ իրենք չեն ցանկանում կոմախ օգտագործել, որովհետեւ այն կեղտոտում է տունը եւ այլն, ու այս հարցը եւս պետք է հաշվի առնել։ Ընդհանուր առմամբ հարմարվողականության եւ անկեղծության զգացողություն ունեցանք մեր մասնակիցների հետ շփվելիս, նրանք նաև շատ հետաքրքրված էին այս էներգետիկայի ոլորտով եւ երբ մենք իրենց հարցրեցինք հաջորդ հարցումներին կցանկանաք մասնակցել, 90% ասացին այո, շատ զարմանալի եւ նաեւ հաճելի էր մեզ համար։ Մարդիկ չեն ցանկանում նաև փողը եւ իրեն ժամանակը վախնել մի բանի վրա, որի շուրջ իրենք համոզվածություն չունեն։ Մեր թեզի վրա մի քանի արտաքին գործոններ եւս ասացին, մենք մարդկանց հարցրեցինք։ Դա անջատվեց մի պահ։ Մենք իրենց փորձել ենք նաև խոսել կազմակերպությունների հետ, տեղական հականների հետ, տեղական կառավարմանների հետ։ Իմ կարծիքով մեծ ազդեցություն ունի նաև անտառափայտի հավաքման ենթարեստորական ակտերը։ Գիտեք, որ շատ սահմանափակումներ կան թե այն մասին, թե մարդիկ ինչքան վառելափայտ կարող են հավաքել անտառներից։ Սա մեծ ազդեցություն վարքագծի վրա։ Էներգետիկ ենթակառուցվածքը ևս հանդիսանում է արտաքին գործոն եւ բնակիչներից շատերը նշել են նաեւ որ իրենք միացած են գազամատակարարման ցանցին եւ իսկ ապրում են բրիկետների արտադրամասերին մոտ ամենայն հավանականությամբ իրենք օգտագործեն այդ բրիկետները։ Նաև շատ թանկ է, մարդիկ նշել են, շատ թանկ է Ռուսաստանից ստացվող էներգա տեսակները եւ բավականին անդրադառնալով իմ երկրորդ հարցին, գենդերային դերերին, մենք կարողացել ենք որոշակի եզրահանգումներ դուրս բերել եւ ներքևի այս գրաֆիկում դուք տեսնում եք կանայք պատկերված են կանաչ գույնով, կանայք ավելի 3-ից 4 ժամ կամ ներեցեք 3-ից 10 կամ անգամ 10 ժամից ավել ծախսում են ապահովելու համար տան ջեռուցումը եւ սա չի ներառում սննդի պատրաստումը, այսինքն շատ մեծ գործառույթ է դրված կանանց վրա եւ զարմանալի է որ կանայք այդքան շատ ժամանակ են անցկացնում դրա վրա։ Պարադոքսը այն եւ ի հակադրություն իմ ակնկալիքների կանանց չի հետաքրքրում էներգիան, էլեկտրաէներգիան, իրենց չի հետաքրքրում առողջության վրա դրանց հետևանքները, որ օրինակ ասենք արևային էներգիան ինչ ազդեցություն կարող է ունենալ կանանց զարմանալիորեն դա չի հետաքրքրում։ Շատ դժվար էր եզրահանգումներ կատարել, որովհետև մենք ընդամենը մի քանի հարց էինք տվել մարդկանց եւ այս բնակավարը թերևս շատ հետաքրքիր է հետագա ուսումնասիրությունների տեսանկյունից ընդհանուր առմամբ կանայք վառելափայտը համարում էին բնապահպանորեն շատ ավելի քիչ բնապահպանությունը շրջակա միջավայրի շատ ավելի քիչ վնասող ի տարբերություն տղամարդկանց Մենք մարդկանց նաև հարցրեցինք, թե արդյոք ինչ մտահոգություններ իրենք ունեն շրջակա միջավայրի առողջությամբ, մարդիկ նշել էին, որ իրենց մտահոգում է անտառային էկոհամակարգերի վիճակը, օդի աղտոտումը եւ մարդիկ նշել էին, որ անտառները դեղնում են, ինվազիվ տեսակներ են ի հայտ գալիս եւ էկոհամակարգը քանդվում է։ Ու նաև մարդկանց մտահոգում էր հողի վիճակը, այսինքն ընդհանուր առմամբ հասկացանք, որ մարդկանց մտահոգում է էկոհամակարգը եւ իրենք նշել են նաև, որ լրացուցիչ ուսումնասիրություններ են պետք։ Ինչ վերաբերում է էկոհամակարգային ծառայություններին, սննդի եւ մաքուր օդի ապահովումը հաջորդ ծերունների համար, շատ հետաքրքիր է այստեղ այն, որ կանայք նշել են, որ վառելիքի ապահովումը շատ կարևոր է, 23% կանանց կարծիքի է եղել, իսկ տղամարդկանց շրջանում այդ կարծիքի է եղել ընդամենը 10%, նաև իրենք նշել են, որ էկոհամակարգային ծառայությունների հոգևոր կողմն է շատ կարևոր իրենց համար, նաև նշել են, որ ջրի ժամանցային ծառայությունների շատ կարևոր է էկոհամակարգային ծառայությունների իմաստով։ Սա շատ հետաքրքիր ուսումնասիրություն է, որովհետև ինչքան որ ես գիտեմ, առաջին անգամ է ուսումնասիրվել էներգիայի օգտագործման մշակույթը Հայաստանում։ Եվ այս ուսումնասիրության շրջանակներում առաջին անգամ է, որ ուսումնասիրվել է էներգիայի մշակույթի այս մշակված շրջանակը։ Փորձել ենք հասկանալ, թե էներգիայի հասանելիությունը ինչպիսին է Հայաստանում։ Առաջին ուսումնասիրության շրջանակներում ինտեգրվել է նաև առողջապահության եւ շրջակա միջավայրի հարցերը, բայց կարող եմ ասել, որ շատ ավելի լայն է մեր ուսումնասիրության հեռանկարը, մենք ցանկանում ենք ավելի խորանալ առողջության եւ շրջակա միջավայրի վրա վառելիքի տեսակների օգտագործման ազդեցությունների մեջ եւ շատ կարեւոր է հավաստիանալ, որ մենք պատկերացում ենք ասում թե կանանց ինչ է պետք, տղամարդկանց ինչ է պետք, սոցիալական ինչ դերեր ունեն իրենք եւ ինչ ժամանակ են ծախսում բարերիքի հետ կապված։ Մեր մի քանի եզրահանգումներ մենք տեսանք, որ ընդհանուր առմամբ էներգետիկ ոլորտում փոփոխությունների կատարման նկատմամբ մեծ դիմադրություն չկա։ Մարդկանց մտահոգում է պարզապես գինը եւ որպեսզի ավելի մատչելի եւ էժան լինի։ Այսինքն մարդկանց նաև որոշակի կրթական եւ տեղեկատվական բաղադրիչ է անհրաժեշտ, մարդկանց մտահոգում է նաև իրենց կողմից օգտագործվող վառելատեսակների ազդեցությունը շրջակա միջավայրի վրա, բայց քանի կախված գնից, էժանությունից մարդիկ շատ մեծ ընտրություն չեն կատարում, թե որ վառելափայտ կամ վառելատեսակն օգտագործել։ Անդրադառնալով մի փոքր իմ օգտագործած շրջանակի, ասեմ, որ այն ընդհանուր լավ պատկեր է տալիս ժամանակի կտրվածքով, սակայն այն ավելի սահմանափակ է եւ չի ապահովում մի մոդել, որով մենք ապագան ուսումնասիրենք եւ կատարենք ռազմական պլանավորում, ինչի մասին խոսեց Սիրանուշը։ Մի քանի կարճ առաջարկություններ եւս ներկայացնեմ, միգուցե կրկնություն լինի, բայց շատ կարեւոր է կանանց հետ կապվելը, կանանց էներգետիկ ոլորտում ուսուցանելը, միանշանակ անհրաժեշտ են նաև սուբսիդիաներ, որոնց միջոցով էներգետիկ ոլորտի միջոցները կդառնան ավելի գնային առումով մատչելի եւ կարեւոր է համայնքներում գիտելիքի տարածումը, գիտելիքի փոխանակումը, դեմո ծրագրերի իրականացումը, համայնքները հնարավորություն տալը, որպեսզի իրենք ծրագրերը առաջ տանեն, ապագայում կարծում եմ շատ բան դեռևս ուսումնասիրության կարիք ունի։ Սա բավականին հետաքրքիր թեմա է հենց ինձ համար։ Ես կցանկանայի հասկանալ Հայաստանում ինչ կարգավորումներ են գործում վառելափայտի հավաքման վերաբերյալ։ Եվ ինչպես ես արդեն ասացի, կցանկանայի նաև ուսումնասիրել հարցի կենդերային եւ բնապահպանական կողմերը։ Շատ շնորհակալություն ձեր ուշադրության համար եւ ես եւ Սիրանուշը շատ ուրախ կլինենք ձեր հարցերին պատասխանելու։
So that was the recorded presentation by Alyssa for Alyssa's work. It was a bit longer than 10 minutes, but I still hope you found it interesting. We have the difficulty now that we can't ask questions to Alyssa directly, but Ellen is here and I am here. We have been involved in the work as well. So we are happy to answer questions in case you have some. So please. Also, you're very welcome to come up with reflections, maybe similarities you see with your own work, or maybe there's something you want to highlight, or maybe also something where you think this is not correct. So Ashad, please.
Yes, I have a question, if I may. My question is the following. I am a member of the community and I'm interested what recommendations would you come up with regarding firewood. Also about fuel. How do you think can this problem be solved? How can we solve the issue of firewood and fuel in Armenia? If I quickly may, we cannot truly provide a comprehensive answer. Nevertheless, I believe we can connect with GIZ. They can come up and they will come up with they have come up with solutions regarding the question raised, because the purpose of this work on the behalf of the student was identifying the issue, understanding the culture of energy efficiency, energy usage. So GIZ, I believe, has a much wider, broader a range of activities. They speak about how increasing the efficiency of stoves and heaters, how can consumers use firewood that will yield more energy and be more efficient. GIZ, within the framework of GIZ, Bastian Aslik and Nuna Sayan have conducted an activity that there is a traditional activity that it's better to burn the wood when it's wet. That means that we use 60 or 70% of the energy of the wood is used to dry the firewood, and after that it warms, heats the house. Also, the construction of the buildings, which are very low on energy efficiency. So they have come up with a complex solution for energy efficiency. And we're more than glad to put you into contact with GIZ and them to share the connections and recommendations with you. The same regarding water resources. In many communities, they are going towards solar and water heating solutions. These solutions can be discussed in details. There might be in other contexts as well.
Are there more questions? Then maybe a comment from my side. What was a very interesting point about Alyssa's master's thesis was that it was carried out under COVID restrictions. So actually we had planned to bring Alyssa to Armenia to do the research here jointly with people in Armenia, but due to the COVID related travel ban, it was not possible. So she had to do the whole work from abroad. And in the beginning, we thought, okay, this is not going to work out. We can't do this then. So we need to skip this plan of having this master's thesis, at least with somebody involved from University of Hohenheim. But then it resulted actually quite not smoothly, but it was possible to do this project in this kind of remote setting. So of course it involved a lot of coordination, collaboration, and openness and effort by the different people involved, but it was possible. And I think here's also a lesson to be learned from this experience, that it's possible to collaborate in an international joint effort if there is the will to do this, and that this can result actually in very nice activities and outcomes. Maybe, Alan, you can also share your perspective on this and how this worked out.
Yeah, I would say that it demonstrated how not only professional researchers, but student researchers can also collaborate with other student researchers. And I think this is a model that we can try to emulate in future projects and future collaborations, because there could be value in connecting students from different countries with students in Armenia and have this kind of synergy of thought and thinking without necessarily having to travel. And so I think there's always value to physically being in a country and visiting and experiencing it firsthand. But if that is not possible, what we learned is that that's not the end of the possibility for collaboration. We can still find ways of collaborating. So.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Good. So let's move on to the next presentation. So we've now heard from two students who had a lot of time to work on their projects. So 6 months and more for completing a master's thesis, really making up the last step, the last part of their program. I think the projects presented now maybe smaller in size, but not less interesting. So we are really looking forward to the presentation by Sarah now, and look forward to learn more about your project and what you did. So please, the floor is yours.
I'd like to greet you all. Thank you so much for this opportunity to present my topic. My topic is how to engage Armenian farmers in applying the ecosystem services approach. Ecosystems, biodiversity, soil, water and landscapes play a crucial role for all flora and fauna, ecosystems. There are a number of ways to categorize them. Nevertheless, the most common categorized are provision categories, which are products from these services, that is food, sweet water, firewood, fibers. The next group are regulating services, which are climate control, pest control, water regulation, treatment of water, and pollination. And the other are cultural services, which are those non-tangible services: spiritual, religious, recreation, ecotourism, aesthetic, inspirational, educational, and cultural heritage. There are also auxiliary services, which are those services which make EC services possible. That is formation of soil, nutrient formation. Regardless of how important the EC, very often they were not treated and respected by human beings, especially the ever increasing demand for food. Flora, a large number of populations of animals and plants have been destroyed, especially those insects which allow for pollination, because pesticides are used excessively. I lost the voice. I lost the connection. We should ensure that we are using sustainable practices to not harm the ES. Food systems are directly dependent on ES. Agricultural crops cannot be grown without water or soil. When we use the land surface, all these services have an implication. When we do forest, when we do logging activities, in order to increase the agricultural land surfaces, we log down the forest. As a result, all the EC products from the forest are destroyed. For example, carbon sequestration and recreation services that we receive from EC. Yes. The most important element for farmers is the soils, the crops, animals, pastures, houses. Nevertheless, the pollinating insects and plants play a crucial role as well. The nutrients are received from the soil and then crops. So the auxiliary products are used for feed and fodder for the animals, and then animals produces with the meat, egg, and dairy products. So to ensure that then animals, they themselves fertilize the soil, as well as dung is used for burning in the winter for heating purposes. And a serious issue we have is soil degradation and the contamination of water, which is directly related with agricultural services. Also, the changes that are occurring with the forests, nutrients elimination, degradation of the soil, this all yields to faster climate change, especially logging of tropical forests, which contribute to high percent of greenhouse gases. The challenge we have is increasing the ES ecosystem services to ensure the soil fertility, water quality, air quality. Fortunately, all around the world, there are such best case practices. We can surely say that ES is important. In order to support these ecologically rational agriculture, there are a number of steps that can be taken. Auxiliary services, consultation services can be provided. There are many cases where farmers are totally unaware of the alternative usage options they have for soil usage, even if they are economically beneficial. How to maintain moisture, how to ensure good pollination, how to increase the services and benefits they receive from the soil. The best cases of increasing awareness among farmers is the best practice that our university has conducted, the research center what we have, by visiting various community, how to ensure that we have safe products from various communities. We have disseminated a large number of brochures, conducted lectures. We have shared information about drip irrigation, fertilization, how we can use natural fertilizers and agro-technological equipment. Recently, we were in Gerard-Kunik, Mars, and 22 farmers households were informed on these technologies. And the other recommendation we can have is long-term investment options. When ecosystems become noticeable after a certain time period, and there is a necessity for farmers to have high investments, it is more than possible that in short terms they might not see the result of the investments they do. And very often, if the investments is less than the contributions they expect in the short term, they would not take the risk. So the credit, loans, and subsidies can play a crucial role in this matter. Promoting ES, ecosystem services. This is very important when the benefits relate to all communities. For example, water sources, which might be 100 kilometers further from the farmer, or carbon sequestration, which might not only be important for the given farmer, but for the overall climate change. I lost the connection. I lost the last two sentences. The second is a broader coordination. Ecosystem management very often assumes joint activities. Those farmers can propose biodiversity, The slide is very small and she is reading it. There are similar structures in New Zealand, the USA, where local self-government bodies regarding ecosystem services and their integration. We can say that the ecosystem services, awareness of them and assessment create possible positive opportunities to increase the quality of life, because they play a crucial role for livelihood sustainability. So it is of paramount importance for sustainability. Among the most important challenges is balancing and leveraging the pros and cons. There are a number of tools that can be used to come up with solutions in this matter, leveraging the costs, benefits, and disadvantages and advantages of various services. So it's important to plan how to engage the community. This gives the opportunity for ensure that agriculture and forest usage are jointly not harming one another, ensuring that ES is done as properly as it should be, ensuring that regulations and protection is also important here. So managing, this is also about self-government authorities. So they use all the leverages they have to ensure that distribution is as equitable as possible. We can also take into account the legal framework. Regarding regulations and protection against self-authorities, self-governments, they play an important role. Self-government bodies should promote the sustainability of harvest. There are many legal approaches on how to protect ecosystems. For example, special seasons when you can cut trees, when you can do hunting to ensure that the ES are available for tourists and they're protected from tourists. Innovative infrastructure is also important. So using innovative technologies, the police and the judiciary can also play an important role to implement the legislation. So next, coordinating and joint activities. This can be implemented on the local level. So fishing and forests all need to be protected. Fishing areas. Regarding investments, local self-government bodies can support or raise awareness regarding investments. Certain local self-government bodies do investments in ecotourism by supporting industry, which promotes the economy. Local self-government bodies can also create positive leverages on how to manage the services. Certain banks have their own tools how to promote green businesses. There are certain investments which are aimed towards the ES longevity. ES services very often arise because people do not understand the impact and consequences or alternatives of their activities. But very often they might not know the consequences. When the benefits of the ES services are identified, as a result, the necessary consultation services can be provided for fishing best practices, water treatment, tourism, etc. When the advantages are assessed, this information can be used for promoting local products, branding local products, and developing tourism. Thank you.
Thanks so much for a wonderful presentation. I open the floor to questions. I think Miriam was first. So Miriam.
I was actually just indicating the clapping emoji to give some.
Okay. Good, then it was Niklas. We still can't hear you.
Excuse me. Also from my side, thank you very much for this interesting presentation. You talked that you approached farmers to inform them about the ecosystem services framework, and I would be curious how you approached them and with what kind of materials you were informing them. Yeah, maybe you can expand. Thank you.
սեղմեք։ Թարգմանության համար պետք է տակը հայերենը սեղմեք, Սարե ջան։ Տեսնում եք, դուք ինձ լսում եք։ Դուք ինձ լսում եք, Սարե ջան։
Սարե, եթե կարողանաս այդ հայերենը արմենիան ընտրել, այնտեղ թարգմանությունը լինում է։ Լսվում է հայերենը հիմա։
Archomotid interpretation
միացրեցի։
Okay։
Այո։
Նիրի, եթե կարողանաս թարգմանես նորից։
Մեր համալսարանում գործում է
At our university, we have an ecological and organic agricultural research study center with which jointly we conducted various activities, especially around the area of Lake Sevan. There are farmers there because the study were mainly about maintenance of irrigation waters. So the studies, we raised these issues there. We conducted research lectures there. The director of this research centers, they presented the farmers. 22 farmer households were informed about new technologies based on which irrigation water treatments are performed with water resource management.
If I may follow up on that question, how big was the interest of the farmers in your activities, in these concepts?
It was just one day, just a few hours of Q&A we had. So the information provided, it was definitely noticeable. They were lacking information. They wanted to have the information. There was a great hunger for information. When our research team presented, they had many, many questions. On one hand, we were very happy that they had so many questions, but on the other side, it was kind of sad to see that these farmers were quite successful farmers. They were based on experience and not on knowledge. They didn't lack any experience, but they lacked knowledge substantially, which we tried to fill in this gap.
Alan, I think you also had a comment, a question.
Yeah, actually, it's a question. This is, when we talk about information flow between farmers or from academia to practitioners, to farming communities, to farmers themselves. What has been your experience? My experience and theory in my head is that most effective learning takes place between farmers and not necessarily between academia and farmers. What has been your experience in terms of spreading the knowledge and the practices? What has been your experience in the most effective ways to do this?
Let's take into account that we ourselves are farmers. So when we conduct scientific research activities, we do experiments. We also are in the practical field. It's not only theory that we do. We are both in the theoretical and practical aspects. So when we speak with the farmers, we don't speak with them as a scientific representative, but we speak with them as farmers. It's not like we're totally knowledge-based. We're not only theory-based. For us, it is important that theory is implied practically in the field.
What you stressed in your presentation was the value of joint activities by farmers. Can you expand a bit more on this as well? So how about going beyond that individual level and trying to advance joint action in the field?
անհատականից խմբակային անցում կատարելու համար
In order for farmers to move from a personal perspective to a group work, group think approach, they themselves are cooperating now together because there are certain products that one farmer cannot produce individually. They buy the raw materials or some elements. So just by borrowing from one another, they ensure not only their profits, but also they can save costs. So you do not consume more than you should. You cannot. It results in higher level of efficiency and using the ecosystem services more efficiently.
Thank you. Maria.
Yes, thank you very much for this nice overview. I was wondering, so you presented many strategies that farmers could take, and where do these recommendations come from? Is it from the experience that the Institute has done? Is it coming from the literature, or do you have also own experience in the field?
Բնականաբար ուսումնասիրել եմ առաջին հերթին գրականությունը.
Naturally, initially I have studied literature, so literature review to understand that overall what methods are used around the world. Secondly, I have understood what would work in our local system, which would be more favorable in the given context. And if there's a necessity to choose one or a few, I would definitely choose the legal framework regulations, since the legal framework, it will be easier to manage the farmers, since they will understand that if they do not do violations and they do not pay for these violations, it's better not to do these violations than to have profits through violations and then pay the fees for the violations.
Thank you.
Is there a final question to Sare? This seems not to be the case. Then again, thank you for your presentation. And let's now come to Ashot and his presentation on his work.
Hello, I am Ashot Gabrielian. My master's is from Sustainable Agricultural Masters. My topic is the role of ecosystem services and food production and food security in Armenia. As you know, for any country, as for Armenia as well, the strategically important item is food security. All people, as Armenian people, try to ensure food security, which is defined as when all people at all times have physical and economic access to adequate, safe, and nutritious food and are able to meet their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. Here you see the main elements. You can see the marginal conditions of the environment, society, urban and economic marginal conditions. These are the elements which allow us to create the chain, which are elements of the value chain which lead to food security. Below we see the functions. The functions are agriculture, wholesale consumption, and physiological response. Unfortunately, when we move from one function to the other, we ensure we lose certain products and we have some levels of waste. This full marginal conditions, the four marginal conditions and the functions all together, they ensure the food supply, food chain. The results are food safety, Okay, I lost him. Is it only me?
Մարդու բարենային համակարգի գործառույթների համար անհրաժեշտ
In order for food safety, the important elements are natural resources, technologies, processing, transportation, raw materials, expiration date, wholesale and sale, marketing, advertisement, food consumption, procurement, preparation, and public relations. In order for the efficiency of food safety, what is important? The social security and also the safety of the environment. I should also mention that food security plays a crucial role with social security and the environment security. They are interrelated. We cannot come up with priorities. Here we see that food safety, we can see three important functions which bring to food safety: food usage, food accessibility, and also food availability, please. When we consider food availability and accessibility, we should ensure that food has enough nutrients, it is safe, and it has social value. When we consider food availability, accessibility, we should take into account the distribution, accessibility, affordability, and the context. And food availability is the production, distribution, and exchange. As I already mentioned, there is an interrelation and correlation between social security and the safety of the environment. When we speak about the environment, we should take into account ecosystem resources, streams, and availability of ecosystem services, and natural resources availability as well. When we speak of social security, it involves income, employment, welfare, social capital, societal capital, and human capital. Here we see the ecosystem services. We should ensure that we have also regulatory services which play a crucial role. They are addition for the other ecosystem services, which solves the food safety issue. All of these lead to the welfare of human beings. In the Republic of Armenia, the ecosystem services as a business entity. Here, the following problems can be solved. Assist in the development of the legal framework for the implementation of the strategic environmental assessment and transboundary environmental impact assessment. Ensure it is in full compliance with international requirements. Raising awareness on the green economy, environmental activities, and sustainable lifestyle. Promotion of EU concepts and tools related to the single market of green products. Development and implementation of state evaluation policy. And last, development of ecosystem value chain. Establishment of a unified network of protected areas involving EU countries, forest protection, and sustainable community action for non-timber production, increasing bioenergy efficiency, revision of innovative financing schemes for sustainable management of ecosystem services. I also would like to speak about concept for ecosystem services, which play a crucial role in the food production and food safety issue in Armenia. Therefore, I would like to ensure that we know the difference between the pastures, which play a crucially important role and directly relate to food safety, ensuring that the food we have is clean and safe. I'll sum up my presentation with the proposed concept for ecosystem services, which is based on this cascade that you can see. On the left part, you can see ecological system, and on the right side, you see social economic systems. The joint section is the ecosystem services. And you see that the ES, they overlap with these two. They become values. The ecological system and the social economic system items, they have added value. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much also for a visually nice end of your presentation. So, questions to Ashot? Maybe you can stop screen sharing so we can better see each other. Thank you. Maria.
Yes, thank you very much. That was a very good introduction to this topic. And I was wondering, at some point you mentioned that one of the aspects that need to be fulfilled for this food safety is a social value of food. I don't know if you can expand a bit on that. What does it mean?
Yes, սոցիալական բաղադրիչը կապել է էկոհամակարգային
I related the social element with ecosystems. And one aspect was the society and the other was the ecology, and the link in between that overlaps is the ecosystem services. So in order for us from ecology and society, the overlap is ecosystem services. The values that are created on the right and left pillars, they overlap in the middle ES section.
Thank you.
Any further questions or comments? Please.
Can I just jump in? Sorry, with one question. Ashot, thank you very much for the presentation. You've kind of presented the key issues, connected the ideas of, food security and ecosystem services together, which is a good thing to do. And so given that you're so close with farmers, where do you see some of these ideas that you presented? Where do you see the biggest work that needs to be done in the adoption of these ideas in everyday practices?
If we consider the development priorities of Armenia in line with your question, I envisage the development of Armenia by the development of agriculture, and all our efforts should be aimed towards agriculture. I myself live in the community, and I brightly understand the issues in the community and the type of agriculture that is being adopted there. Studying at the Agrarian University, I truly understood what agriculture is really taking place. It is just immensely different from what we see and what it should be like. So the agroecosystems should be emphasized and improved. To ensure that the ecosystems should be developed, especially those where human activity play a crucial role. We should work on improving agricultural practices, definitely.
Ashot, you talked also about pastures, and I would love to learn more about pastures, because I think very often with pasture management, we see also the problems connected to the ecosystem services concept. So we might on the one hand say it's good to improve productivity of pastures, intensify, for instance, through more livestock on the pastures, contributing more to food security. But on the other hand, this may result in more erosion, for instance. So a decrease of other ecosystem services. So how do you see the value of the ecosystem services approach in tackling these critical issues, these trade-offs between different ecosystem services?
Շնորհակալություն հարցի համար։ Ներկայումս Հայաստանի
Thank you for the question. Currently, the pastures of Armenia cover quite a large area. If we chain map the pastures correctly, pastures are totally enough and sufficient for the existing animals. The issue here is from another perspective. The pastures are not managed properly. Those pastures are used which are adjacent to the community, but the remote pastures are not being used. If they are used, a very low percentage of the remote pastures are used. And the issues that you raised about degradation and soil erosion, it is especially around the communities. The remote pastures are unused.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So this means it is more about balancing and better distributing the use across space.
It's
a matter of balance, yes, and distribution.
Okay, thank you. A final question or comment for Ashad. Nobody takes the opportunity. For this reason, thank you again, Ashad, for your presentation.
Հարցերը դրվել են ձեր համալսարանի կողմից, առաջին անգամն է ներկայացնում եք սա։
Այո։
This is the first time you're presenting this? If you have questions from your university side, we can also repeat here to translate the question. If you're streaming on your university portal, you can raise the questions here and we can. Local partners don't have questions. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Also, if you don't want to unmute yourself, you can always use the chat for raising questions or commenting on what is presented and talked about here. So, good. So we have our last presenter now, and that's Monica. Please, we are looking forward to your presentation.
Yeah, I'm here. Ողջույն բոլորին, շնորհակալ եմ այս ծրագրի մասնակցության համար։
Issues, sorry.
Monica, very sorry, but we can't hear you very well.
Yeah, we have some technical problems. Sorry for that. We will change now.
Yeah, there's an echo.
It's better.
Slide երևում է, չէ՞, նորմալ մի վարքը։ Իմ ձայնը նորմալ լսվում է։
Yes, can you hear me okay? Let's see.
Իմ զեկույցի թեման է էկոհամակարգային ստացած օգուտներն են էկոհամակարգերի միջոցով ապահովող էկոհամակարգային ծառայությունների տարբեր կատեգորիաներ, դրանք են բնափայտը, ջուրը, սնունդը։
Just me? Is it just me, or it is also cutting off at your end?
Ինչպես նաև աջակցող ծառայություններ, դրանք են հողի ձևավորումը, ֆոտոսինթեզը, սննդային նյութերի հոսքերը, եւ էկոհամակարգային ծառայություններ մարդկային
Ecosystem services are the direct and indirect investments. The purpose of this study is to study the ecosystem services in Armenia. This will allow for all local stakeholders to fill in the gaps regarding the ecosystem services. International and regional efforts are all aimed at standardizing ecosystem services, which will allow to facilitate the assessment of ecosystem services as an environmental and ecological accountability insurance mechanism. So this ecosystem services on the international level is considered common international classification of ecosystem services. So now let's speak about the ecosystem services payment and the issues related to these. Take into account that ecosystem services very often are not sold on the market, and the markets cannot give the necessary signals which will promote the equitable distribution and usage of these services. Therefore, the ES payments can be considered as a ES economic mechanism towards the efficiency of ES. This is important to ensure that there are various economic mechanisms, the optimal joint usage of such mechanisms. This assumes that the ES payments will play a crucial role for the economic assessments. The existing environmental legislation can serve as a foundation for ES payments, for adopting ES payments. Nevertheless, aside from that, it is crucially important to understand the value of ES. In order for to develop this, there should be configuration between buyers and sellers. That could be different approaches. I have 4 different approaches, one for all. In this case, there's a company signs a contract with one large landowner, ensuring large quantity of carbon sequestration, for example. The other second approach, one for many. In this case, let's say there's a water household, there's a water pond, they have a broker, they are paying a few farmers for water sensitive management practice implementation. The third, many for one, when the green areas of the cities and their protection, a few buyers invest in one area. And the last one is many for many. In this case, the state pays the farmers for managing the soil sustainably. So in the next slide, you see the ecosystem services, the steps taken by the Republic of Armenia government, and I will present the results here. So the first step is the following, that the ecosystem service concept has been implemented back in 2011 by the Environmental Ministry of Environment when Armenia participated in conference in Russian Federation, and all the countries of the previous USSR. There was an ecosystem and biodiversity economics related discussion in Moscow in 2011. So the second step was in 2011 when the Environment Protection Ministry and the RA government in 2011 and May 20, there was a decision and environment project development implementation and plan was approved. The third step in 2012, the RA Ministry again of Environment and the RA government came up with a decree number 16 in 2013, April 25, according to which the innovative financial economic mechanism concept was approved, the main cornerstone of which was adoption of ecosystem services, international best practices, which included ecosystem classification, payments classification for ES value definition, efficiency, ES profitability cases, ES existing challenges and solution algorithms. And the most important result that was accepted was that ES have not yet received an economic value. So according to the fourth step in 2013, the RA ministry developed and the RA government approved in 2013, November 14, number 47 decree. There was an innovative financial economic mechanism concept implementation plan was approved. The fifth step was there was a first draft law on ES. It was the first round, and the ES were studied in the RA and the issues related to the legislation. RA existing legislation, ecosystem service concept was not used previously, is not used. Nevertheless, there are different definitions of it and similar details related to biodiversity protection and normative regulations. The sixth step, in 2015, the ministry also developed the draft law again about ecosystem services, the main purpose of which was to ensure management, implementation of efficient models of ecosystem services. Those among the decision makers, the middle and higher level representatives had a discussion during which the ES lack of concept, this was discussed, as well as the lacks of such as, for example, legal regulations have issues, cultural ecosystem services, their definitions were lacking, increasing of the tax burden, taking into account the above issues and challenges, and taking into account that the accepting of such a law for Armenia at the moment outdated. It's not timely, so ecosystem services and payment in the adoption of payments for ecosystem services yet need clarification and further work. And on the other hand, taking into account that ecosystem services and implementing the system in the current situation reality of Armenia can create an additional level of financial burden on those who are using the ES. Instead of a law in 2017, a new adoption concept was implemented within the framework of which the existing challenges could be solved and move forward step by step. So the second step, starting from 2011, the RA government, a number of strategic plans have been approved, which are envisaged to conduct the following activities. The first is biological diversity protection of reproductive and in usage strategy. There are a naturally specially protected area strategy for usage and protection, the state plan, the RA desertification strategy, and the national action plan. The years adopted are mentioned on the slide. It is understandable and very clear that the activities mentioned above significantly will promote the ES and the idea of ES and the payments necessary for it. Nevertheless, it will not solve all the issues. The existing solution of existing issues, the eco policy. We have a law called eco policy. It's a draft law. This will help to solve the issue of implementing the idea of ecosystems and ensuring its legal measures. So the lessons learned, we came up with the following, that for ES, we need to implement legal regulations towards the solution of the above mentioned challenges, to ensure that state civil servants are trained accordingly and those who make the decisions, and ensure that the regulations and challenges which have been identified do 1 or 2 showcase models for these. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monica, for your presentation. And I would ask the audience, who has a question or a comment for Monica? Niklas, please go ahead.
Yes, so first of all, also thank you from my side. It was a very interesting presentation on what strategic, on what strategies there already are in Armenia. So on your second last slide, you mentioned some strategic plans. So for example, against desertification and also for the promotion of ecosystem services, the concept of ecosystem services. And yeah, and in 2015, there was this conference. And now my question would be, what happened to those plans? Are they still in effect? Were they revised or, yeah, so because, yeah, it's, yeah, this is my question. Thank you.
Thank
you for the question. All the steps that I mentioned on behalf of the Republic of Armenia government, they are being implemented. They are in the implementation phase.
If I may follow up on this, how do you see the dynamic regarding ecosystem services? So do you think that what is there is sufficient at the policy level?
I
believe taking into account the development of the economy that we are with now, the steps that the RA government is taking has a positive outcome.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Yeah, what do you expect for the future? So will the ecosystem services related strategies play an even larger role in the future? Or is this not the case because what is there is sufficient?
Շնորհակալ եմ հարցի համար, եթե հասարակության շրջանում ավելի լայն լինի իրազեկման մակարդակը.
If the awareness level is broader among the community regarding the ES, the issues and challenges with their implementation, I believe the dynamics will be very fast. Mm-hmm. Literal translation.
Okay, thank you.
Your experience, has ecosystem services, you've worked at a lot of farming practices in the European Union and different parts of the world. Has the concept of ecosystem services been easy to transfer to farmers and agriculture in general? What has been your global experience? I know this is a very general question, but you know, because ecosystem services is a complex set of ideas, with a complex set of, you know, actors that need to work together. So what has been the European Union's experience with this? Claudia, I'm addressing this question to you, sorry.
I mean, the European Union's experience with this is that the concept has been massively used. So it's literally in any new program you would find, in any strategy. So everything has been built around ecosystem services. And I would say overall it has been proven very, very useful for working on this aim of integrating different sectors at different spatial scales, at different administrative scales also, or government scales also. So reaching from the very local level to the national levels and beyond EU level and so on. So I think this is one of the major concepts we see, and it will continue because it works so well. So you can communicate this concept easily to policymakers, but also at local levels of decision making. And this is the reason why I think we will still see a lot of land management activities framed around ecosystem services.
Thank you.
Is there a question to Monica or a comment?
Yeah, I think, Monica, one point that I would make in going forward in all the research projects is how we can get very practical to the ground level and bring these theoretical concepts of energy, food security and ecosystem services down to the farm level, and specific mechanisms of engaging farmers, businesses, and policymakers. I'm not sure all policymakers are there. You're very optimistic that the Armenian government is moving forward. I'm not sure of that, and I think the situation is much more messy and complex than that. But I think it's very important for research that we do at universities to really go into the next level to the ground level and working with farmers and understanding the different challenges in adopting different practices. For instance, in pasture land management, the Ashot was pointing out that the question is one of, how a pasture land use is the distribution of the used pasture lands, and as well as the intensity of the use. So I think, if we're talking about more distributed use of pasture lands, what exactly does that mean in terms of infrastructure development, in terms of farmers being willing to, what motivates them to go really that extra 2 kilometers or 3 kilometers or 4 kilometers, 5 kilometers to be able to use the pasture lands more sustainably. So, and this is both a question and a comment, I guess. So.
Yeah, it's a comment, but it's a great also concluding comment. So your take on the most important next step to achieve with regard to harnessing the ecosystem services concept for biodiversity conservation and sustainable development. And I would, since we are actually approaching the end of our meeting, I would actually now suggest that we make a round of concluding statements of the 4 presenters we have around here. So following up on Alan's thought, what would be the most important next step in your eyes with regard to the uptake of the ecosystem services approach in Armenia? Who wants to start?
I guess I can start if you want.
Mm-hmm. You're very welcome, Miriam.
Yes, I think for the wild harvest, there was this point that was raised earlier about communication between the first, like integrating the academic concept into what is happening in the field. Because what I found is that there's a lot of knowledge present that can be used in that respect. So involving the local harvesters in ecosystem service research, and not just like acquiring their knowledge or capturing their knowledge, but actually integrating what they're already doing with this concept will be very helpful, I think.
So this citizen science approach you are pointing to. Okay, thank you. Ashot, are you still with us? Do you maybe want to add your thoughts on this?
Այո, ես կցանկանամ ասել, շնորհակալություն հարցի համար։
Yes, thank you for the question regarding the pastures. solving the issues related to pastures, I envisage the following, that first we need to create collective farmers concept. So this individual farming leads to soil degradation. If we have collective farming practices, in this case, we can use the remote pasture lands. Not only the herd moves to the pasture, but usually they are totally moved towards remote pastures. And there they use the pasture lands there, because we know that the more animals walk, they lose energy, and that changes their productivity, which is economically not profitable for Armenia. That is a solution I propose. I think it's more than feasible to do this using remote pastures and collective practices.
Thank you very much for this statement, which is actually pointing to a very interesting discussion also in the international community on how to best organize sound use and management of ecosystem services. And here, as in your case, looking at the pastures in Armenia, very often collective solutions are proposed and deemed particularly potential. Potential, not powerful. Let's come to Zare. What are your thoughts on the most important steps?
I don't have much to add. What further steps can be taken? Do you have any comments or recommendations? My topic already. In order for these studies to be final, the recommendations in the studies should be implemented. When you say implementing, what are you referring to? What steps should be implemented? Defining legal norms within the framework of our ecosystems. As a result, ecosystems will be better protected. So you believe that the legal framework development is a priority? Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you also for this complementary perspective on the debate around ecosystem services. So then we have Monica. Monica, what are your thoughts? So what is your concluding statement? Next important step on advancing the ecosystem services?
The next system should be to train the necessary experts, which will raise awareness among the society in the urban areas, rural areas, to train them on what ESR, and the most important, to have the sustainability of the legal framework and regulations be clear. That's all so far will be enough for as a start.
Thank you very much. So we have a great overview of different ideas on how to advance ecosystem services, the uptake of the approach in Armenia. I thank you all for your contributions. I hope that this little exchange, so these 2 hours we took today, may be a start for further collaboration, for connecting and networking in the field on ecosystem services related research in the country. This is also an invitation for collaboration across the borders. So if you're interested in international research on ecosystem services, getting in touch, for instance, with students from Hohenheim University in Germany, who are pursuing programs in the field of agriculture and also working at the interface with environmental sciences, then you are more than welcome to reach out to us. Let's see if there are opportunities for joint research projects. It can be little projects, it can be larger projects, can be connected to master's thesis, bachelor thesis, but it can also be just a project, just an informal way of exchanging. With this invitation, I would come to an end. Would thank you all for this afternoon. Ellen, do you have any final remarks or comments?
Thank you, Claudia. The comment that I made is that I really see the future of ecosystem concept in taking it to the field, trying things out. I don't have a lot of hope for legislation or regulatory framework being improved in Armenia in this regard. I do have more hope in the market forces and in the local community practices to experiment with approaches. And perhaps for some time it will be donor driven. It will be supported by donor funding to experiment with attempts. And hopefully, if we can find successful ways, we can put this into the legislative arena, because I don't see our politicians today very interested in these topics. Therefore, I think civil society and experts and the donor community need to work together to make progress in this front. So,
okay. With this, I say goodbye to all of you. It was a pleasure having this group of people here together. I hope you all enjoyed and got some interesting food for thought. Have a nice rest of the day, and I would be happy to meet you again virtually or in person and follow up on ecosystem services in Armenia and beyond. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.